At the Japanese Grand Prix, McLaren were given a shocking reminder that if they aren't perfect, Verstappen will make the most of it. At a race where McLaren were expected to win, Verstappen put in a qualifying performance that was branded as perfection, and when overtaking proved basically impossible during the Grand Prix, that incredible pole position was good enough for the race win. This was a wake-up call for the McLaren drivers of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Verstappen doesn't care if McLaren have the best car on the grid. He's quite happy to remind them that the driver does still make a difference. Just to hammer home his performance at Suzuka, Verstappen took time after his race win to tell the media exactly what he thought of the McLaren drivers' performances. Today I'll check out what he had to say and why the weakness that McLaren showed in Japan might be abusable for him again. So don't go anywhere. Verstappen was rightly showered with praise after his qualifying performance last weekend. He hadn't really looked in contention for a pole position at any point of the weekend until that final lap of qualifying at Suzuka. If McLaren were going to be challenged by anyone for the front row of the grid last weekend, it had looked all weekend like it could have been George Russell. The four-time champion had been struggling with the balance of his Red Bull car throughout the practice sessions, with not really any proper solution in sight. His team had been making change after change to the car to try and find a setup that he was going to be happy with. But on the first runs in the final qualifying session, he was still more than 0.2 seconds slower than the quickest McLaren, which at the time was Oscar Piastri. Verstappen knew that he had to do something incredible to be anywhere near the two McLaren drivers. So he sent it. The last lap, he said, "I was like, well, I'm just going to not try and feel comfortable. Just send it in and see what we get." It's very rare, of course, that a lap like that then can stick, but this time it worked well. He didn't just send it into one corner, he sent it everywhere. Exit of turn 1, he said, into 2, 6, 7, 8, and then spoon. Those places I was like, well, I hope it's going to stick. But it did. In the end, Lando Norris ended up second best. The Briton turned it on for his second attempt, improving by 0.2 seconds over his previous best lap and just snuck ahead of Oscar Piastri. But it wasn't enough to stop Verstappen's unbelievable drive. "You've got to credit something when it's a lap that good," Norris said. Which he must have done, you know? McLaren team principal Andrea Stella added, "It looked like we were on the way to pole position. Lando managed to improve significantly on his second set. But with Max, I've stopped being surprised. He's such an incredible driver, and for me this is one of the many cases in which we have to just acknowledge and say hats off to Max." McLaren never really challenged Max during the Grand Prix. I mean, sure, Lando was always within a couple of seconds of the Red Bull driver, but he never really put Max under any serious pressure. With nothing inventive in terms of strategy coming from McLaren, it almost seemed as if they were waiting for Max to make a mistake, which is just never really going to happen, you know? After the race, Verstappen almost couldn't believe that he'd been able to get away with the win. Importantly, it was a performance that halted Norris's attempts to start building a lead in the Drivers' Championship. The Brit leads the Dutchman by 1 point after last weekend's Grand Prix. Now, Max was asked for his reaction after the race, and whether it was a result that was purely based on his own performance. His response made it clear that he thought the McLaren drivers had both failed to capitalise on the sizable performance advantage their car has. "I'm very happy with what I'm doing. I don't even want to think about it. If I'd been in the other car, then you wouldn't have seen me." That is a brutal way for Max to say that if he had had the same machinery, he would have disappeared down the road in front of Lando and Oscar. But Verstappen was that good at Suzuka, he probably isn't actually that wrong. But of course, it was a performance that was founded on some incredible work by his team. Verstappen specifically called out his race engineer, GP, and performance engineer Hugh Bird, who helped him find a setup that let him put together that magic lap in qualifying. While it was a huge surprise to see Verstappen drive to a win last weekend, he has exposed a weakness at McLaren, which means he could pull off similar performances again. Now, McLaren team principal Andrea Stella thinks Verstappen's driving, rather than his equipment, was a defining factor behind his triumph, and that relying solely on individual talent may not be enough to come out on top over the course of the grueling 24-race season. "I think Max at the moment is somehow making a difference himself," the Italian said in Japan. "But it's very difficult to keep up for 24 events in a season if you don't have the best car." Assuming that Max won't be able to do this again is a big mistake, but despite what Stella thinks, there was more to this victory than just Max's brilliance. But before I talk about that, if you're enjoying the video and want to catch all the news and analysis from the Bahrain Grand Prix, then make sure to press the like button down below and subscribe to F1 Reverse. Thank you very much. So, McLaren might want to say that Verstappen's win in Japan was purely built on his own brilliance and is something that isn't going to be repeatable again. However, Red Bull disagree. Verstappen and Horner gave credit to the work done by the team on the track side, who found a setup which allowed Max to absolutely flourish in Q3. But the Red Bull boss has also said that McLaren denied themselves the win with their team order tactics. Or, well, lack of them, really. Horner thinks that Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, having what appears to be equal status, made it harder for McLaren to fight Max Verstappen in Suzuka. In the second stint, Piastri had asked the team to swap positions and give him a chance to fight Verstappen, with the Australian feeling that he had extra pace in hand. And that certainly seemed the case as well, as Oscar managed to really close up to Norris a few times, while Norris was never able to get his gap to Verstappen to below a second. However, team boss Andrea Stella was not convinced Piastri was actually faster than Norris in the Red Bull's dirty air. "I don't think it's so clear that Oscar was faster," Stella said. "Lando was trying to get Max's slipstream even closer, but anytime you went below a second, there was a significant loss of grip. At this track, you need 7-8 tenths of performance advantage in order to be able to overtake." Now, Lando never managed to get the gap down below a second though, so in theory the loss of grip wasn't an issue. He simply didn't have the raw pace. For McLaren, there was absolutely nothing to be gained by just leaving Lando sat a second or so behind Verstappen the entire race. Swapping the drivers, and at least giving Piastri a go for 5 or 10 laps or so, would have cost McLaren absolutely nothing, because if Piastri couldn't get the move done, then McLaren could have just swapped the drivers back on the last lap or something. But if they had made that decision, then it could have earned them a race win. So it seems like swapping the drivers to at least give Oscar a chance would have been a decision with absolutely no downside. Now, McLaren's sometimes really strange handling of their two drivers during races is a weakness. And it's a weakness which, in Japan, Christian Horner thinks cost them. I guess the problem they have is they have two drivers that are fighting for the Drivers' Championship. The difficulty they have is that they've made a bet where they're going to let them race. So that's the compromise that inevitably comes with that. Verstappen's new teammate Yuki Tsunoda looked better than Lawson in Japan, but no one's under any illusions that he's going to be fighting for a Drivers' Championship in the RB21 anytime soon. Tsunoda also knows that if the situation ever comes around, he will be asked to move out of the way for Verstappen. For the time being though, McLaren aren't willing to do that, even though it could have earned them a race win in Suzuka. At the Bahrain Grand Prix this weekend, it'll almost definitely be another battle between the McLaren cars and Max. And if the Papaya team are going to continue their hands-off approach to managing their drivers, then Red Bull and Verstappen could quite happily take advantage again. What do you think of Verstappen's comments about the McLaren drivers not making the most of their machinery in Suzuka? And do you think McLaren could have won the race if they had stepped in and enforced team orders? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.